Why hello there, and welcome back to Tabletop Ferox. And in this episode, I'm going to be looking at Denial and Yearning, a trashy lesbian romance novel game, which was released in 2021 by Soft Chaos, and is a trashy lesbian romance novel game. And notably, it is not just a trashy lesbian romance game. The novel part is a novel part of the game's design and experience. And if you're wondering how that all works out, well, good news, I'm about to explain it. Denial and Yearning is a two-player game in which each player takes on the role of one of the two leading lesbians. However, there is also a third character who's going to be relevant here, the author. So each player comes up with their character's name, occupation, description, and so on, but then one player defines what hidden part of the author's self their character represents, and the other what hidden part of the author's desire. Then after the characters have been defined and introduced to each other, each player chooses something that they find irresistible about their co-lead. Each leading lesbian also has priorities, which are things that are important or otherwise significant to the character's life. So, the trashy lesbian romance novel your character is writing could be a priority, but so could their social anxiety or fear of rejection. Just anything that is going to take time and energy out of their life and potentially away from their developing relationship. And the priorities are not defined right now, they are introduced during play. I just needed to explain what they are so that you will know what I'm talking about when I mention them later. But as I mentioned, we do still have that third character to deal with. The players collaboratively come up with the author's portrait, biography, and the dedication from the novel. And while these things may not seem that significant on the surface, the game does stress considering what each of those things says about the author and how they choose to present themselves to the reader. Basically, even though the author does not appear directly in the game, they are still an entity that influences the game. As shown, both of the characters are in some way an aspect of the author, as is the entire world in which the game takes place. Things like how dramatic or silly the game is are going to be influenced by that author you create and how they would write the novel. Which also just happens to be the last thing that we have to define. So we need to come up with a cover, tagline, and pull quote for the novel, but not the title, that comes later. So as I said earlier, the fact that this is a romance novel game is not incidental, it is a meaningful part of the game's design and experience. Also, I do really like the game asking the players to make a cover for the novel. I like the idea of encouraging people to do creative things. Especially ones that they might not be particularly good at and therefore under the impression that they cannot do. But you can. You are allowed to draw or photobash a cover for the imaginary trashy lesbian romance novel that you are playing a game set in. Even if it turns out terrible, you still created something, which is more than most people do. The actual game is structured into 3 acts: Denial, Yearning, and Crisis, the first 2 of which are then broken up into 4 chapters. And then each chapter is from one of the leading lesbians' point of view, with the other player taking on the role of the author, or, the game master, because that is what the author is in this game. Each chapter starts with the POV player choosing a question that will somewhat define the scene, and then at some point will either introduce or emphasize a priority. So for example, the question could be, how will the character find inspiration for her latest romance novel, which her publisher is already getting impatient about? And while they don't have to be related, that could introduce the priority of the romance novel. And then the players role-play out that scene, and at some point the author player can introduce an emotional turmoil, which is, quote, something that suggests the leading lesbians should definitely be together, which the POV player must completely ignore. Hence the denial aspect of the denial act. You are given obvious reasons why the characters should be together, and your place is to go, I'm sure when she said, "you have beautiful eyes," she meant that just as a friend. Then, once the scene is wrapped up and the question for that chapter answered, the POV switches to the other leading lesbian and the players switch roles. Then, after 4 chapters, there is a turning point scene which elevates the character's relationship to the next stage and the next act. And that is the basic structure of the Denial and Yearning acts, except that some of the specifics are changed to, make them different. And then finally, there is a crisis act, which is much quicker, told from a shared POV, and focuses on one of the character's priorities, causing some sort of conflict between them. So once again, returning to the priority of a character's new novel, there could be a release party for the novel, and at that party, the character is kind of ignoring the other leading lesbian, just smoozing with all the other publishing people, maybe getting a bit too friendly with a few of them, and, creating some kind of stress and possible distrust. But then, of course, that is resolved with some kind of grand gesture and a big romantic ending. Then we slap a title on the novel, and the end. As you may have noticed, there is no kind of lose condition here. It is very much a game based around the idea that the characters will get together eventually. It is about the how of this relationship, not the if. So there is a lot here that I like. This game is pretty much purely narrative, and a lot of purely narrative games have a bad habit of also lacking structure. Especially those based around social and especially emotional topics, where it seems like reflecting on emotions is supposed to be in and of itself sufficient gameplay. But this is a game that provides structure and direction for the story to take. At every step, you know what you are supposed to be doing and where it is leading. At no point are you just kind of meandering around trying to figure out where the story is supposed to go. There is always a clearly defined next step forward for you to take. I also really like the idea of defining the novel and the author before the game starts. As I said, it really helps establish this is a tropey novel premise, which is then reinforced by the game's structure. Also, by giving the author something of an identity and personality, as well as some thematic trappings for the whole story, it gives both players a common reference point for their characters, as well as when they are playing the author. Without getting too meta about it. If you would like to get too meta about the fact that your characters are in a novel and can interact with the author, I would recommend The Tingleverse, the official Chuck Tingle role-playing game. So overall, an okay concept. It is fun, and as I often say, I do like games that explore themes beyond kill things and acquire material wealth. However, trashy lesbian romance novel is not exactly the most unique concept I've ever seen. It is, however, very well executed. For as simple of a concept as it is, it would have been very easy to implement just as simplistically, like pretty much every other romance-based game I've seen, which weren't even worth reviewing. But here they've implemented it in this very structured system, which makes this game not just feel like a game, but also feel like a romance novel. As I've said, I really like the games that go out of their way to fit their genre and theme, and this game absolutely does that. It is not a game that just slaps some romance novel tropes on top of a basic resolution system. It is a game where they looked at the key elements of a romance novel and then built a game around highlighting those key elements. Basically, they started with romance novel and built a game around it instead of starting with a game and slapping romance novel on top of it. Which, as I said, they did very well, right down to the mechanics forcing you to constantly avert the romantic progress of the characters, in a way that really just makes you want to shout at them to just kiss already. And it looks okay, cute art, but the layout is overall just kinda average. And that was Denial and Yearning. If you want a trashy lesbian romance novel game, this does that thing pretty good. Or if you're just looking for something a little different, perhaps a slightly more intimate two-player experience to enjoy with that special friend or roommate. And thank you for watching, with extra special thanks to my Fight and Flail Snails, Randy Mulholland, and Toshiro Crow. If you'd like to be cool like them, check out my Patreon, where you can get early access to videos and fun stuff that I make for the Patreon. But if you don't want to do that, that's cool too. You can still hit all the lovely buttons, like, subscribe, these other videos which either myself or the cold, heartless YouTube algorithm have lovingly selected for you, which I'm sure are lovely videos that you will also enjoy. And I will see you next time.